Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to sad news to report on the death of superstar Billy Graham, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, sweeter than a German chocolate cake, eating barbell plates, all that good stuff. Um, yeah, he passed away at the age of 79. He had a number of health problems throughout his the latter half of his career. But here we're here to celebrate a man who was a trailblazer, a man who was a trendsetter, a man who was an innovator in the world of professional wrestling, superstar Billy Graham, aka Eldridge Wayne Coleman. He started off his career in the Calgary territory. He was born in Arkansas to a Cherokee mother, and as a kid, he was heavily into the bodybuilding world, the weightlifting world, and was close friends with Arnold Schwarzenegger because he was in that world. But I guess that didn't really work out for him. So in 1969, he headed down to, um, first he was in the Canadian Football League. And when that didn't work out, much like other wrestlers such as Fritz von Erich, he headed down to Stu Hart's territory, where Stu Hart trained him in the infamous dungeon, and he got started as a professional wrestler. Initially, he wrestled under his real name, Wayne Coleman, but then in 1970, he broke in the Los Angeles territory, Mike Bell's territory, where they teamed him with the Graham brothers, Eddie Graham and Dr. Jerry Graham. Again, a famous kayfabe wrestling family, much like the Andersons. The thing with the Andersons, they were never, none of them were ever Anderson. Ole wasn't an Anderson. Lars was an Anderson, and Arn wasn't an Anderson, but they were a kayfabe wrestling family. Well, the Grahams were similar. They weren't. None of them were named Graham except for Dr. Jerry Graham, and neither was Billy Graham. And of course, he took a lot of his persona from Billy Graham, the real Billy Graham, the televangelist, and he developed this sort of preacher esque type rap that he got from, Tent Revivalist, and of course he got from Muhammad Ali, which is funny because we know, and we talked about in this channel before, that Ali was heavily influenced by professional wrestling, was influenced by Gorgeous George, influenced by Freddie Blassie, the likes of that. So Ali was influenced by them. He put out that energy in his boxing career, and it fed back into professional wrestling, being influencing then Billy Graham. So from there, he goes on to um, the San Francisco territory. Now, at this time in the San Francisco territory, as you can imagine, the late 60s and early 70s is the hippie era. So he adopts um, he adopts the tie dye, the hippie look. Because come on, you're in San Francisco, the place where Haight Ashbury is, the epicenter, if you will, of American counterculture. So even even in 1971, 2 years removed from the Charles Manson murders, which kind of the Charles Manson murders and Woodstock was kind of the end of the hippie era, especially the Manson murders, because it put a bad public face on the sort of hippie type look. But Billy Graham, he was still running with it, and he was ultra popular as a heel in that territory. From there, and that's where he developed this gimmick where he became the arm wrestling champion. So before his matches, he would arm wrestle and his opponents, and he would beat them that way and humiliate them that way. I could imagine that sort of thing gave him ultra heat because I mean this thing just happened, this massive public event. There's a lot of animosity towards the hippies. He's adopting this hippie type persona, and he is kind of putting it in the faces of the people in the same city where this infamous incident, just freaking happen. So from there, he goes on to the American Wrestling Association, the AWA, the Midwest, and he develops another another dimension to his character, in which he he says that he can lift this amount of weight and that amount of weight, where he's doing the dumbbells thing. And Vern puts the moniker on him, Superstar. Now, this is from Jesus Christ Superstar, a famous play that was out in the 70s um, at this time. So Vern was the one who foresaw that he would be called the Superstar. And in the Midwest, in the cities that Vern was promoting, I can imagine he was getting probably a lot more heat, because if you got heat in the West Coast, where this was the hippie thing was part of their culture, part of how they lived, and imagine even more so in the Midwest, where they were anti-counterculture. They were against the counterculture. They were against what the counterculture represented. They were the silent majority, as Richard Nixon would say. He would get even more heat and calling himself Superstar, trying to put himself in the role, in the vein of a Jesus Christ-esque person. I can imagine it was tremendous heat. And then they put him with Wahoo McDaniel in 1974. And he and Wahoo McDaniel had the first ever Indian strap match. Now, Wahoo McDaniel in the 70s and AWA, it can be argued, was one of the most over baby faces in the company, because when Vern Gagne did the movie in 1974, the wrestler, the original wrestler, with Ed Asner from the Mary Tyler Moore Show, the second match that was second billing after he and Billy Robinson was Billy Graham and Wahoo McDaniel. And Wahoo, Native American superstar, tough as nails, SOB, reputable in the business, as one of those guys like Harley Race, one of those guys that will really beat the shit out of you. His chops, Wahoo McDaniel originated the chops that we in the modern era associate with Ric Flair. Every time you hear, hard knife edge chops, everybody goes, woo! Well, that didn't start with Rick. That started with Wahoo McDaniel during the territory days. Wahoo, Wahoo. One of the best Native American superstars in the history of wrestling. So anyway, he and Billy Graham have this tremendous feud in 74, and that's what gets the attention initially of Vince McMahon Sr. Vince McMahon Sr. in 1976 calls up Billy Graham and says that he's going to put the belt on him. He's going to take the belt off of Bruno. Now, this was Bruno's second run, his run from 72 to 74. I'm 72 to 77. And it was a winter night in 77 when Billy took the belt off him. He beat him with a roll-up, putting his feet on the ropes, cheating. He was managed by the Grand Wizard, and it was here in New York that he really, really got over the top. Because you guys got to understand something. The New York territory was a territory that was predominantly a babyface, good guy territory. Yes, the first champion ever of the WWF in 63 was Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. But from the time Bruno stepped in those doors and beat Buddy Rogers with the backbreaker in the month of May in 63, it was a babyface territory. Yes, they had Ivan Koloff. Yes, they had Stan Stasiak. But those guys were really quick transitional champions. They couldn't wait to put the belt back on, put the belt on Pedro Morales, or put the belt on Bruno again the second time. So those guys, those heel champions, they didn't even really count. They didn't even really want Ivan Koloff to be the champion. There was one incident where Ivan Koloff, when he was champion, he was wrestling Mario Milano, and they taped Mario Milano beating him just in case he didn't want to do business. They would air the Mario Milano match and say that he lost the belt to Mario Milano, and he would be stripped of the championship from there. So they didn't really have faith in Ivan Koloff, and they didn't have faith in Stasiak. So they never really put the belt on any heel. But Billy Graham was the champion for like 6 months in the New York territory, and that was unprecedented. And he was selling out. He was selling out everything. They had um, public um, uh, public workouts with him in the middle of Times Square. He was selling out the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. He was selling out the Philadelphia Spectrum, the Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, all the Northeast territories like no other heel had ever done in professional wrestling. He was the superstar. But unfortunately, Vince McMahon Sr., he had made this promise to Bob Backlund, a handshake deal, initially started from a bet with Eddie Graham. Eddie Graham had bet Vince Sr. that Bob Backlund, a plain all-American babyface from Minnesota, could not get over in New York because all the champions in New York had always been, larger than life, over the top champions or ethnic baby faces like Italian guys or Puerto Rican guys or like superstars. So he bet him that that Bob Backlund could not get over in the New York territory, and he wouldn't put the belt on him. So Vince Sr., being a man of his word, was gonna put the belt on Backlund no matter what in '78, despite the fact that the entire Madison Square Garden, every time Bob Backlund would step in the arena with the championship belt, would chant at him "Howdy Doody, Howdy Doody." They looked at him like he was some Howdy Doody motherfucker, right? Like an Opie Taylor type motherfucker, and they didn't respect him as a champion because Billy Graham was so over. Billy Graham was so different than anybody in the New York territory had ever seen because he had those promos, he had that rap, he had that bodybuilding physique, something that no other wrestler in any territory ever had before him. Because, like, you look at the champions in the late 60s and early 70s, all these champions, they had what they call today dad bods. Yeah, Bruno was in shape. Bruno did weightlifting, obviously. That's how he got his foot in the door, right? In the late 50s when he was doing things on the Pittsburgh local market with Rudy Miller. And he was a weightlifter, and he was an Italian. He was a strongman type, and he did the same thing when he went um, with Frank Tunney in Toronto. But he didn't have the physique. He wasn't cut like Billy. He didn't have the definition like Billy. Nobody had the definition like Billy prior to that. Nobody had the look, the handlebar mustache, the tie dye, the rap, calling everybody brother. Nobody was that superstar like Billy was. So New York was completely blown away. And he was on a roll, but Vince Sr., he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to run with him. So after he loses the belt in '78, he goes to other territory, and he's still doing great business with the Crockett's when he goes back to the AWA. He's still doing tremendous sellouts when he goes to back to Florida and all these other territories. But New York kind of lost the step. When I look back at granted, I wasn't alive during that era. That was before my time. Wasn't even born then. But when I look back at old footage of the Bob Backlund era in the WWF, especially in the bigger cities, like I said, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Pittsburgh, those bigger cities didn't seem like Backlund was all that over. At least not at first. Not in the '70s. Maybe in the '80s. By the time uh, he got into some of his bigger feuds, but in the '70s, no. And Billy Graham turned out to be right that Backlund wasn't going to do the business that Billy Graham was going to do. So anyway, he comes back to the World Wrestling Federation. By that time, it's the World Wrestling Federation. Vince Senior is in charge. I mean Vince Junior, the Vince we know now is in charge. The kid, as the old timers call him, the kid, because he was Vince Senior's kid when they were wrestling for Vince Senior. He's in charge, right? Funny now we call him the old man, but they they call him the kid. But anyway, he's in charge, and Billy Graham comes back with a new persona, this karate pants persona. He's wearing karate pants. He's doing a karate type gimmick, and that wasn't really getting over. That was like they missed the boat. They missed the opportunity to really make him a babyface, turn him babyface, and he had the angle all planned out. He was gonna he was teaming with Ivan Koloff, and he was gonna turn on Ivan Koloff in a tag team, and that's how he was gonna turn babyface. But again, they missed the boat. So when he came back in the early '80s, looking like the Iron Sheik, his hair tie dye black, wearing karate pants, it just what it wasn't. It was gone. Then when he came back again in the late '80s, and he managed Don Morocco when Don Morocco turned babyface, and he had Morocco coming out wearing tie dye too. This was at WrestleMania 4 in the tournament, 87, 88, right? This is what I remember. I know it was 87, but he did it in 88 too. It still wasn't working. They put him on commentary. He was on commentary for the first SummerSlam at Madison Square Garden in 1988, right? And it still wasn't working. But then by the 90s, he was on the outs with the company. He uh, he had come out. The steroids trial was happening. He had that uh, come out against them for steroid use. He came out. He actually was on all the talk shows. Larry King, Phil Donahue, all the talk shows accusing Vince of distributing steroids to his wrestlers, and really started talking about steroids. Now the ironic part was that Billy was one of the first to introduce steroids to the business. Was one of the first wrestlers to use steroids. Obviously, that body that he had, that he was so well renowned for, that he was so well acclaimed for, that they were praising him for, wasn't a body that came about him naturally. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger now talks about how in the late 70s and early 80s, back when steroids was illegal, it was something that was ubiquitous with bodybuilders as well as wrestlers. A lot of guys were using it, and Billy Graham was one of the first to introduce them into wrestling. So he's coming out against the company, he's castigating the company for something that he actually introduced into the business. And so even though he introduced a lot of good things in the business, he was a trendsetter. Like I said, Jesse the Body, when he left Vern tried to recreate him with Jesse the Body Ventura. When Jesse came to Minneapolis from the Portland territory, it was Vern who put the superstar-esque gimmick on him uh, and made him the Body. You know what I mean? Hulk Hogan copied a lot from superstar Billy Graham. Most of Hulk Hogan's heel persona that we saw in the late 90s with the NWO was completely ripped off from Billy Graham, stuff that Billy Graham had already done. Dusty Rhodes, his sort of rap, even though they were contemporaries. Dusty Rhodes and Billy Graham. See, when Cody Rhodes, nowadays, when Cody Rhodes talks about um, his dad never reaching the pinnacle and his dad almost being there, the first time his dad was wrestling in the New York territory in the late 70s, it was against superstar Billy Graham in the first ever Texas bull rope match in New York. So imagine these two colossal giants on the mic going at each other, and both tremendous promos, both tremendous rap, both guys who started off as heels. They were a tag team together as heels in the AWA. But when Dusty went to Florida, the fans loved him so much that they had to turn him babyface, just like Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1996. See, Vince McMahon Jr. had the foresight to say, look, they're cheering Stone Cold Steve Austin. Let me turn Stone Cold Steve Austin into a babyface and give Austin the run. Vince Sr. didn't do that with Billy Graham, and he should have, because that's the same thing that happened with Dusty Rhodes in '74 when Dusty was heel, and then he went against Pac Song Man, and then Gary Hart, who was his adversary, turned him into a babyface, and he became the biggest babyface, one of the biggest babyfaces in the 1970s. So if Vince McMahon Sr. had done that with Billy Graham, who knows what Billy's career would have been? Billy himself probably wouldn't have suffered the depression and the personal problems and personal demons that he had in his life had Vince Sr. done the right thing and turned him babyface when he needed to. Because sometimes the fans know better than the promoters. The promoters, they have their vision in their mind. They want to do it their way. We saw this with Roman Reigns. All throughout 2016, 2017, 2018, Roman Reigns was a babyface, and Vince wanted us to cheer for Roman, wanted us to love Roman like the way people loved Hulk Hogan and the way people loved Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock, and it just wasn't happening. That just wasn't what the fans, they wanted to boo Roman. And finally, 2020, they came to their senses, but they never did with Billy Graham. And when they did, it was too late. You know what I mean? His body was already torn up. That was the time to do it. The late 70s was the time to do it. And unfortunately, he's a classic example of how promoters can miss the boat. You know, strike while the iron is hot. Do it when the time is right. If you wait, it may be too late. You know what I'm saying? I think that now with Cody Rhodes, you know, they didn't put the belt on Cody at WrestleMania. It may be too late to put the belt on him after that. that train might have gone. That ship might have sailed. You know what I mean? You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's gone already. You know what I mean? I don't know. I can't predict the future, so I don't know what's gonna. But we can learn from the past and learn that there are several times in wrestling history when promoters have missed the boat, and this with Billy Graham was one of them. Think about it this way, guys. What are WWF wrestlers called? WWF wrestlers are not called wrestlers, as we know. WWF wrestlers are called superstars. And they got this name from Billy Graham, who was the first superstar of professional wrestling, the first superstar of the WWF. The guy who took the business from where it was with the days of Bruno and Pedro and those really boring vanilla type baby faces that would just cut promos like "I'm gonna win for all my fans" and all those, you know, boring vanilla-esque promos to the larger than life promos that we later saw in the 80s with Hulk Hogan, with the likes of Hulk Hogan, and in the 90s with the likes of Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. He took it from point A to point B to where it was to where it became. And also with the physiques, those doughy type physiques, those yeah, they were in shape. The Harley Races of the world, the Dick Murdochs of the world, the Brunos, they were in shape guys. The Pedro Moraleses, they weren't fat guys necessarily. At least some of them weren't. I mean, there were, you know, you had your McGuire-tons, you had your Haystacks, Calhouns and all that. But I'm talking about the kind of dad bod type guys. You had those type of individuals, but you never had before Billy Graham the muscle bound guys, and his physique became the prototype for every single wrestler, especially in the 80s and in the 90s. His promo ability and his physique, his look and the way he carried himself, his persona became the prototype for practically every wrestler that we saw subsequently. So for that, he deserves our props. And he had his problems. You know, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2004. He reconciled with the company after the spat they had in the 90s. And him and Bruno Sammartino were basically persona non grata. Like, it's funny because when I was a kid, really heavily interested in the WWF, really heavily watching the WWF, I never heard anything about Billy Graham or Bruno. Those two guys were never mentioned, and because of that reason. But in 2004, in the Garden, right before, in the New York City area, before WrestleMania 20, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Then he was there like on a Legends deal, whatever. And then when Linda McMahon ran for Senate in 2010, um, he came out against Linda McMahon's campaign, and he was once again on the outs with the company until 2015 when he took um, uh, when he signed up another Legends deal to take Dusty Rhodes' place as one of the main trainers for NXT. So his career, his life basically has been a lot of ups and downs, especially with him in WWE. But yeah, rest in peace to superstar Billy Graham. You were a tremendous legend. Thanks for moving the business forward because a lot of us never would have been fans of professional wrestling, when never would have enjoyed this particular medium of entertainment had it not been for Billy Graham. Because as when I look back to the Bob Backlund era or the Pedro Morales era or the Bruno Sammartino era, as great as Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales and Antonino Rocca really worked the business. As much as they were selling out arenas during their time, their personas and the way they carried themselves was boring as fuck. You know, half the times, those sort of wrestlers, especially when they came from the heavily ethnic backgrounds of say uh, the Spiros Aryan types of the Brunos or the Pedros, they couldn't even really speak English. You know what I mean? Their promos were um, incomprehensible to the modern American. So uh, Superstar updated that. Superstar brought the promos up to date, the rap, if you will, up to date. So for that, he deserves respect. Rest in peace, Billy Graham. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Leave those stars, guys. Love you.